Welcome back to Get Fit Guy. This is your host, Kevin Don. I'm very excited to have my second guest join me on the show this week, who is another amazing female athlete, someone I'm very fortunate to call a friend and a former colleague. This is Ramona Pascual, who is a former UFC fighter, TEDx speaker, and a fitness entrepreneur who runs her own online fitness coaching business. She helps burnt out millennials look and feel their best without fad diets or endless hours in the gym. And she believes that sustainability is the key to having a positive relationship with diet and exercise, thus leading to long term results. Ramona was raised in Hong Kong, where she played for the Hong Kong national rugby team and currently lives in Las Vegas with her husband. Hi, Ramona.
Hi, Kevin.
I can't believe it's been such a long time, since we've spoken face to face. And I was thinking about it, and I believe that it was probably 2014. So actually, 10 years ago when we were both working in Epic MMA in Hong Kong.
Yeah, it has been a hot minute. Been a
Yeah,
while.
a very long time. And obviously, we've both done lots of things in the meantime, but we're here to talk about you and not me. I mean, you've done so many things since I last saw you. I'd say the biggest thing that's obviously out there is that you were fighting in the UFC, which to me is incredible because I still remember when I met you first in Hong Kong. I still have a picture of a night out I think we were all on, and it's crazy because I think you must only have been like 17 or 18, and so it was maybe like 2008 or something like that. And just to think at that time, having this girl coming in the gym who was interested in kickboxing and Muay Thai and had some talent for doing that stuff, but then to kick on and have such an amazing career and fulfill your dreams really is quite amazing. So it's really inspirational. So thank you for coming and joining me. But I guess the question for me is that what brought you to wanting to do this?
Um, Thank you so much for that, Kevin. I can remember fond memories of us hanging out, and it almost feels like a lifetime ago. Such a different chapter and season in our lives. As far as what motivated me to get into professional athletics, I think I've always had a predisposition to wanting to be in athletics. I played a lot of sports growing up, but I don't think I didn't start until later. So I just remember being like grade school, and there not being enough opportunities for actually girls to be doing sport. This is like back in the 90s. And so I didn't really play on teams, but I had this, sort of fantasy to do so, which is funny. It brings me back to this movie that I grew up watching that really kicked things off, and that was the Mighty Ducks. I don't know if you remember those. The trilogy, I believe it's the
D3,
trilogy.
yeah.
Oh my god, so good. Like remembering what that felt like to watch that just gives me goosebumps sometimes, to where I was just so into it. And obviously we didn't have hockey in Hong Kong, so that was just not going to happen for me. But then went into team sports when I got to middle school, because there were, girls teams and opportunities to do that. And I was always super shy, super um, lacked a lot of confidence when I was younger. And I think, I wasn't so good at academics either. Wasn't really involved in clubs because I was so shy. And so I think sports became that outlet where I could express myself, or where I just forgot that I had these insecurities and I could just, be myself. And so I think that really just stuck with me. And it just became this journey of me wanting to further myself as far as being more confident and being learning more about life, learning more about, how far I could go. And I think that's ultimately what's brought me, to where I am today.
Amazing. Yeah, I was just talking to somebody yesterday about the power of sports and like you mentioned there, that not having confidence and maybe not being super outgoing in social situations, but then sports has always seemed to be removes all of those barriers, right? And it's a very good social equalizer I think what I liked about martial arts was that you could be in there doing some training and some sparring with someone that could be like a C-level executive, or it could be like a guy that sweeps the streets, and everybody's just the same. And I loved that about martial arts and sports in general. So it's interesting to hear that you had this positive experience on your own confidence coming from martial arts. That's good to hear that it's empowering, because that's what we want as coaches, right? Is to feel that
Yeah.
people are being empowered by what's happening and not having their power taken away from them. So that was at school, and you were doing rugby first of all, right? But I believe I read somewhere that you were also playing some basketball. Is that right?
Yeah, correct. It was basketball and rugby simultaneously throughout middle school and high school.
Yeah, and then you went on to represent Hong Kong at rugby. Was that rugby sevens, or did you like play other forms of rugby?
Yeah, so that was a bit of an accident actually. I moved back home after college, and started training Muay Thai full time. And then the girls that I went to school with just needed an extra player for their rec league.
Okay.
So I started that. And then the captain of our team happened to be also the captain of the Hong Kong team at the time. And she was like, "Why don't you come on? We're always like looking for girls." And so that's kind of how I fell into that. I played for, I want to say, 2 years, but I did get injured, and it was like so bizarre. It was 3 injuries back to back in a row, ending with my ACL being torn, and that was the last time I was ever on the pitch.
Wow.
And I think that also made me realize that I didn't love it enough, or at least like wasn't playing for the right reasons. And I think I just played because I just really loved the camaraderie. I loved the girls that I was playing with. And I loved playing games, but I didn't actually like the training aspect or the process at all. And so I think that was that was a light bulb moment for me to be like, well, I think I'm ready to step away and focus all of my energy on the fighting.
Yeah. But I mean, first of all, apart from that, is that you did mention that you weren't any good at academics, but you did go to school. And first of all, before dedicating yourself full time into training and fighting, that you did try to move into working in a corporate environment. Am I right?
Correct.
And what was it that you felt inside of you that said, this is not the right thing for me? And what kind of process did you go through there, like in an internal monologue with yourself, and to say, this is not what I want to do, and this is not my path, and I want to forge this other path? Because also, I think that a lot of people listening to this, I believe that most of my listeners are in the US, is where maybe females doing MMA is kind of quite a normal thing. But perhaps at that time in Asia and in Hong Kong, especially, that might not have been something that you would see a lot of people coming with a good degree and a chance to go into a corporate background being like, you know what, I'm going to go and be an MMA fighter now.
Yeah. Uh, it it really was this inner voice that I think I'd always had. Getting into martial arts at 16 and just practicing and having no plan to compete, and I was actually afraid of competition because I didn't want to get punched in the face. But it just, I love the process, and so that's what made me stick to it. And I think throughout college, I stopped playing basketball and rugby, and I just continued on with Muay Thai training. And at the gym where I was, it was, this is like 2007, 2008, right, in LA. And so you don't have gyms that are super geared to the mass market, to where they're UFC gyms now, UFC Fit, things like that. It was very much a fighter's gym in a warehouse space, North Hollywood. And so a lot of the people that I would train with were fighters. And, some of them part time, some of them full time. And I kind of just got thrown in the deep end with like right away, like drilling and right away sparring. And I sucked. I was the worst. I was also one of the youngest, one of the few females, like, Asian females. I was one of the few of as well. But I think that was such a challenge and mental thing for me, it was just to show up. Like, if I can show up today, that's a win. For everyone else in that class, it could have been their second session of the day. They're just kind of going through the reps.
Yep.
And being around those, and so that was a lot of growth personally that I experienced. and a lot of, having to exercise discipline to, like, to make it there, show up, put in the effort, and just the feeling afterwards of accomplishment, right, was uh, like elation beyond what I could like describe, more than like anything else that I was experiencing in college. That could be parties and this, that, and the other. And I think seeing how down to earth all these fighters were and how put together they were, well, seemingly put together, who knows, they were just so courteous, respectful, all that. And so I just was quite inspired by their character. And I think that's what made me start to kind of play around with the idea of maybe I should get into competing. And then I kind of talked to a few of the people at the gym, and they're like, "Yeah, why not? Give it a try. What's the worst that could happen? Um, you don't like it, and then you don't do it again." And so that was kind of what I had in my mind of a plan. This was like before I even graduated. So once I did graduate, move back to Hong Kong, it was sort of like, let me take that year to do this. Like, I just really want to do this, see where it goes. And so I always thought it was just going to be a temporary thing, scratch that itch. It seemed to me in my mind just ridiculous. Like, I was here, I have a business degree from a good school. I'm around none of my peers like fight. They're all like in consulting or real estate or uh, finance. And so that was just the standard. And so my goal was always to meet that standard. But then it was also to incorporate this part of my life that I just wanted to explore briefly. And so I did that for a year, just trained and competed full time, fought twice in Hong Kong, twice in Thailand, just loved it, absolutely loved it. And then it was obviously, time to get a real job, you put this degree to use. And so first job I had was in, cold calling, like software sales. So I was in that for 4 years. And then that's where I transitioned into working at Epic, where we met, where we were working together. Because at the time, the person that was opening the gym literally had no team around him, wanted the help of someone who was local to help pretty much set up the business. So at that time, it was sort of like a startup phase.
Hmm.
And so I was involved in all of that. And it kind of just was a perfect alignment of like business and my passion of martial arts, like together, right? To where they were opening up this mega gym that's never been seen in Hong Kong before, in the heart of the city. And I put on a lot of different hats, a lot of different roles I went through with like hiring, with acquiring vendors, with copywriting on the website, with a lot of different management roles, even like bookkeeping, accounting. I was really bad at that, but it was like almost more responsibility than I should have had at 24.
Hmm.
But then we didn't hire a whole team around us. And that was a really great way for me to just gain that experience of like being a manager as far as operations. And I think it kind of hit me 4 years into it that like I still work at a gym, even though I'm a manager. I'm in management, right, working right under the chief operating officer. I was still working at a gym, and some reason that just still was in the back of my mind. And so I thought, well, now the next stage is to go into one of these more traditional industries like consulting, property, um, finance. But I didn't really have the credentials for it. And so I ended up working for this financial services company, where I did a little bit of sales for their subsidiary brands, but also a little bit of like analyst work to like learning how modeling works and things like that. And that was really cool because then I got to see the perspective of the investor, and they were sort of just brokering deals between investors and projects. And that was really cool for me to see that side of the business that was like pre-launching to like how are we looking at these numbers with cost, with projections and things like that. But it also made me realize that I'm sitting in this office with like gray walls, cubicles, it's quiet half the time. I look at my boss and I'm like, I don't really want to be like him. And it's going to take me decades to get to his level. Granted, he's got all the money to spend on anything he wanted, but I just realized quite quickly that it just wasn't for me. Like it just wasn't a place for me. Like it wasn't a very collaborative atmosphere either. You know, it was very just like plain, like it would be in a financial services company. And at the time, I had started training jujitsu, really getting into that, traveling all over Asia to compete. And with my Muay Thai background, jujitsu background, you know, MMA was growing. There were shows in Hong Kong. The UFC had added women. I was watching all those fights, getting really inspired, and it just became this buildup of all these different things together that just made me decide. First of all, I don't like this job, so I'm gonna leave it. So I'm gonna have to do something else. Second of all, I want to give this MMA a try, and so it sort of made sense for me to go into personal training, um, because I already had these certifications that I got for myself, actually, because I wanted to excel, you know, and understand strength conditioning to be able to program for myself and understand why my coaches are, you know, programming certain things, like the why behind it, the nutrition. And so, yeah, I kind of fell into that because it gave me time, flexibility to be a fighter and to train at those hours, which all then lends to like also my role today, which is a fitness coach. And so that's kind of where that journey began, but I didn't really realize that at the time. So I guess very non-typical. Obviously, nobody I know back home really has done what I've done, and there's no one who's done it before. And so there wasn't really a benchmark for me to follow. So I kind of have been just going about it on my own and just trying to trust my gut as much as possible, and really not closing myself off to any of the opportunities that would come my way. And that, you know, became leaving Hong Kong to move to spend 6 months in Korea, and then after that, it was to spend a year or a year and a half in Phuket, and after that, it was a year in Shanghai, and then over to here.
Yeah, and from what I understand as well is that moving to Shanghai was because UFC had opened a performance institute there, but then COVID intervened, right? And then closed that thing down, which meant that perhaps you weren't able to fully pursue that opportunity at that time as well, which was why you ended up moving to Vegas. Am I right in that?
Yes, correct. COVID hit. If it wasn't for COVID, I wouldn't be in Vegas. Actually, I'd probably still be back in Shanghai, finishing off my career there. I always thought that I was going to stay in Asia, but once COVID did hit, all the travel restrictions, it became clear that I wasn't going to get the opportunities that I wanted there. And, you know, at the time I was 33. So it's, you know, time's ticking as far as the rest of my career to be making the most out of my peak. And so, yes, that's what prompted the move over to Vegas. And it was actually meant to be a 4 to 6 month trip. And I've been here for 3 years.
Crazy, right? And now you've gotten married and everything. It's just crazy how one thing is a domino effect that can open up other doors and change your life, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And back to the mindset that I realized I didn't properly answer that question. The mindset that I had from switching away from the corporate environment to fighting and what I wanted to actually do, even though I didn't know if I was going to be any good at it, didn't know if I was going to actually like the lifestyle because I'd never even done it, was really this nagging feeling that I wasn't meeting my true potential and that there was no way that I was going to be able to do that sitting in that office in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And so the fear of inaction of what could be a future regret was just so strong, relate relevant to like the fear of actually taking action and doing it. And so I think, like they say, right, it's like most of our regrets come from the things that we didn't do rather than the things that we did.
And I guess
And
that in the future, you know, you can go back to a corporate job later, but you can't go back to being an athlete when you're 40.
100%.
Like your time's done. So it's still something very brave to have done, but also you had that window and that was the only one you really could have taken. So I think it brings me there's a couple of things we that you mentioned there. Obviously, there's things that you know it would be good to talk about, and we talked a little bit earlier offline. about this idea about the difference between an athlete and being someone that's looking at wellness. So, like when you were talking to me there, and you mentioned about your initial sort of going to gyms in NoHo, right? Was it or
Mm-hmm.
right? And and you know everybody there was a fighter. And then when I think about somewhere like Epic in Hong Kong, where we maybe had a different scenario where everybody there was a banker, right? And then that was slightly different. So, but I'm still thinking that, you know, back then as a coach for me, I was also very immature at that time, and I still treated everybody that came in the door like they were there to be an athlete. I didn't think that, you know, this person's been at work for 12 hours and they were out entertaining clients last night till 4 a.m. and they've just come in the door and I'm just like screaming and shouting at them, let's go. You know, you can lift that crazy weight and, you know, you should be running as fast as you can and just driving yourself into the ground because obviously stress is stress, whether or not it's training stress or relationship stress or work stress. So it's kind of just interesting now to see that you were a very accomplished athlete, but now your main goal with your clients is helping them with their wellness. So, you know, what would you have said for you now would be the main key takeaway for maybe like a younger coach too, or a younger version of yourself in terms of these are different things. Don't get these mixed up.
Mm. Going back to your point of like treating everyone like an athlete, I think also at the end of the day, they really wanted that. I think they really appreciated that, even though it wasn't good for them. You know, it was sort of their opportunity to get all the stress out and really just forget all their problems and go full out on something and really feel proud of themselves for doing something that maybe people around them were not willing to do. So I think there's something definitely to be said about that. But yeah, to your question about the about this idea of sustainability, and I know what it feels, what I know what it's like to have an unsustainable approach, because high level athletics is highly unsustainable, to where we are constantly pushing our bodies to the absolute limits, but we can because we have a team of physiotherapists waiting to pick up the pieces when things go wrong, or surgeons ready at the ready, ambulances ready to go right outside the venue. And it's the crash dieting that we have to do, the intense weight cuts, right, of like losing anywhere from 8 to 12 pounds within a 24-hour period, and more for a lot of other people. The hard red line trainings 5 days a week or more. It's really pushing, like that's just an elevated level of stress constantly, and it's almost counterintuitive to what we're trying to do with like performing at our best, which would mean feeling our best, which would mean recovering our best and like resting really well. But we're constantly in a state of fight or flight, constantly in the sympathetic state,
Hmm.
unable to really recover between, because of the volume that we're doing. And it still is to this day how it is in sports, right? Though there are a lot of people that are getting smart to it, that are trying to really pay attention now to recovery and all that. um I reflected on that, and I'm still fighting right now, but just way less than I was, and I still train to maintain, but I'm not hitting it hard like everyone else. Ironically, I feel really great every time I go train because I'm so well rested. Well, I can see like, people that have just been there for the whole week, just like kind of dropping like flies. But it's made me really understand, right? So understanding the stress response and understanding the things that are stressors.
Okay.
And so that could be, not eating enough. That could be doing too much. That could be being so stressed or having this mental state of like unrest that you can't recover. And if you're not recovering, the weight comes off way slower.
Hmm.
Really difficult to lose the weight at that point. It's also really difficult to have more energy at that point. And that's really the whole reason why people should be exercising, is to feel good. And I've pushed so many times beyond that to where I just didn't feel good anymore. And that just really taught me, like, I just remember thinking to myself, like, I don't want to, this is so temporary. And that's kind of what motivated me to keep going with it, because I know this is only temporary. But I was definitely thinking, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. Like, this is crazy. Like, I can't wait to like not have to do this anymore. Even though there is like an enjoyment out of it, to like know that I'm pushing myself that hard and be around people, in that room of like a lot of positive motivating energy.
But it also sounds like that would be something very challenging to your psychology, because we've got two conflicting experiences and desires. Because we've got this one experience which is saying, I really want to do this with my life and I really want to be a fighter. But then we've also got this other psyche over here which is saying, this is a nightmare, this is horrible, and I don't want to do this again. And those two seem to be at odds with each other. And it must be incredibly difficult to have two competing psyches within one person.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the culture around the sport is you don't talk about that other.
Right.
Everyone feels it, right? Like, we're talking to each other. Oh man, I feel like crap today. Like, oh man, this is gonna be rough. And if session hasn't even started yet, you can see in their face. It's probably because you've eaten 1,200 calories yesterday and the 6 days before that.
Well, I guess that's
So
because it's kind of like just modern day gladiatorial, right? I mean, you can't be like, oh man, I don't want to go out in that arena and fight another bear, right? But that must be hard, because I don't know what goes on in big organizations like UFC. I can only talk to small things that I've done. And, there's certainly nobody that's coming to say, like, okay, how do you feel about having, been hurt? Or the big thing for me is I remember the first time really feeling that I'd hurt someone else. And nobody came to be like, how do you feel about having broken that person's nose, right? And like, well, I feel terrible, actually. So it's interesting, because we see in a lot of other sports like soccer and basketball and these big sports like that, where there's a huge amount of sports psychology going in. But how much psychology is going into fighting? I mean, did you guys have like dedicated sports psychologists that were helping you with this?
we did have one available to us at the UFC, but not a lot of people were using that service. So a lot of it is just support people, teammates supporting each other, or really just you having to study. So you're really having to study philosophy a little bit, not really knowing that you were studying philosophy, but you're like, we talk about sports mindset all the time. So you're almost just learning a lot about that just through your own practice. So through your own experiences and being, you know, they when they talk about strengthen the mind, what that really means is get your mind to ignore the signs that your body is giving it. And so we push through. We're like, we hear the signal, fatigue, the stress, the irritability, the inability to sleep, but we still push through that. And that's the practice.
Hmm.
And the more you can do that, the better, because then you can continue doing what you're doing, which is incredibly unhealthy, but very necessary for that level of sport.
Right. But totally unnecessary, I would argue, for someone that wants to be healthy.
100%. And that's what I try to get people to realize, because a lot of times they think that more is more. They're on social media and they're seeing David Goggins, they're seeing your Liver King, all these guys who are doing intense workouts, who are just shredded and jacked. And they're thinking, oh, if I want to look like that, I need to be training 6 times a week, at least twice a day. I have to be, eating this super clean diet of 100% whole foods. And that is so unrealistic, to where most people believe that that's what they need to do and they try it and it works for a short period, because they probably just lose a lot of water weight from cutting out all the carbs. And they talk about, oh, I feel sharper. But then why did you gain it all back then?
Yeah.
And which means tells me that it wasn't something that you could do for a really long time. And so what's the point of that? And we have to understand, of course, you can say processed foods are not good for you, but we live in a society where it's everywhere. It's convenient, it tastes good, it's cheap, it's convenient. So taking that into consideration that we're not living out of caves today and we are really around all these supermarkets and all these conveniences and like the Uber Eats and things like that, there is an effort to be made for, trying to maintain a nutrient dense diet most of the time. But it's the reality is your kid's gonna have a birthday party, you're gonna go to Fourth of July event, you're gonna go to this, your work's gonna have whatever, and you don't really want to be that guy who's like, oh, I can't do any of these things. You just don't have a social life. You live under a rock. Nobody wants to love you. You're single forever, and then you just die alone. It's we're social creatures. We have to have time for each other, and I think people focus so much on diet and exercise, they don't focus enough on quality social interactions.
Right.
And I think it has to be folded into it, and also considering other responsibilities, like if you have a really you have a full-time job, you're also a primary caregiver, you only have so many hours in the day, and to hold yourself to that standard of like 6 hours 7 hours a week, it's just not going to work. You're going to fail, you're going to feel worse about yourself. And that's, I think, another thing that really gets to me as well, is people have these bad experiences. They do the whole fasting or like no carb and like working out twice a day every day, and they're like, yeah, it worked for me. But then it's like now they've rebounded back, maybe fallen off the wagon because they just that wagon the bar was so high that now in their mind the idea of getting back into shape is it's paired with a negative memory
Hmm.
of them having had to work so hard to get there that it's not worth it. And then it becomes this, oh, it's not healthy and all these things, but there is a sustainable, healthy way to do it that most people just haven't really come around to yet.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. A lot of it does come down to that kind of like hustle porn, right? I mean, it's great. Like David Goggins is very inspiring, but it's like you said, is that's not what the population in general are supposed to be doing. And the problem is that then when you can't, necessarily like achieve this excellence, it's like you think you should be doing more and more and more and more to try and get to that point, and that just doesn't work for most people. It's super unsustainable and super unhealthy, and yeah,
And
it's
it's
hard.
and it's kind of traumatizing too, right? To where they're like, well, health isn't for me. I don't want to do that. I don't want to get to that point where it's too much work. And it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that where I've seen people that were like very, very, very into um, fitness, let's say, right? I'm thinking about someone that actually was a client at Epic right now, but I won't say. And like super into fitness and like running to the gym down Queens Road in your bare feet with your weighted backpack on, coming into the gym, hitting it hard, screaming and shouting at everyone, and then running back home, and just over the top with fitness, and then it didn't work for whatever it was that they wanted, and then now they've abandoned fitness entirely and are living in Tulum or Bali or somewhere like that where they just meditate and feed monkeys and take psychedelics. The thing is, so it's like, I'm sure you've heard of the manga Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah.
And I think about it in that way. So at the beginning, they were really focused on trying to fix the shell. And then they realized that that didn't help them. And they were left, like you say, very traumatized with these negative experiences that they had, thinking, well, I was supposed to get better and feel better by fitness, and I feel worse. So then they abandon it, and then they just work on the ghost. But the problem is that the ghost is carried around inside the shell. So both of these things have to work together in order for you to be healthy, I believe.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. And like you said, the approach is so critical as well. The rate of progress is critical. Um, Expectations have to be clear. And ultimately, it's physical and mental when we talk about health. So if you're mental state is not in a good place when you're pursuing health, then it's not actually health that you're pursuing.
No, it's avoiding yourself. And I think we see that a lot too, where people train very, very hard and train multiple times a day. And it's almost like, those people that have to constantly be busy because they can't be with themselves because they don't like maybe what they see or what they feel as an experience of self. So there has to be this constant external thing. And I think it's like nothing takes away your pain better than more pain,
That's amazing.
right? So people are just like addicted to this external pain, and I can certainly say that because, as you know, I did this ridiculous martial art called Kyokushin, which is the most stupid martial art anyone could ever do. I mean, it's just like, right, okay, today what you're going to do is you're going to stand still, and a 90-kilo man's going to kick you 100 times in each leg, and then it's like, what? Oh yes, absolutely, I'm down for that. Let's go. In fact, make it 200 each leg. So, and you're right, and that's not that's coping with pain by inducing external pain. And I think that
Right.
there's got to be a way that we can deal with this. So it's like you said earlier on, and I completely agree with you, that when we were treating people, we say we, I mean I, because at Epic, treating people like they were athletes, and how much they needed that and how much they enjoyed that. And that's right. But I also think that the role of the coach is to get people ultimately to want to do what they don't want to do. So, like, they want to be treated like athletes, but maybe it's our job to get them to realize that's not really what they want. And so it's like taking a drug, right? Where you're on this drug for a while, but then when you come off the drug, your dose is titrated. So it's like, I'd imagine for you now, and you did touch on that, is like you've titrated your dose because at some point you were like in the performance institute and you were training hard. And yes, you had all these things done for you, like nutrition and recovery and so on, that you had that maybe sort of weekend warriors don't. But even irrespective of that, you've still titrated your dose down. And this could be another critical difference between what an athlete does and what someone that just wants to be fit should be doing. And if those people right now are up here going to work and then going training like an athlete, how do we titrate these people off that?
What I would do is look first at what their true motivations are. Like what is your actual goal? And some people could say it's weight loss, right? Now I want to see my abs and I just haven't never seen them before. And then I would work backwards from that goal. And it could just be I want to feel good, or it could just be I want to feel stronger, and then working backwards from that, right? If you take, and you could take strength and you could take fat loss, it's like working backwards from that. If you're doing too much, and there's just constant stimulus, there's nothing really to adapt to, and there's no real recovery process for your muscles to actually recover, heal, and therefore grow, and be able to, well, get stronger. And so it's almost counterintuitive to be hitting it so hard. So it's sort of like, if you want the results that you want, how about you give this a try for 4 weeks and dial it back, and, or even like increase your calories a little bit, right? Let's like focus on recovery and see what happens. And I think when people start to experience the result that they've always wanted, then they're convinced that will be then the proof that they need to stick to this new way of, of exercising. I think there's a small population of people that actually are addicted to that feeling of like grinding, like actually like it. I think there are people that think that they need to do it to achieve the results. So the majority of the people that think that they need to do it to achieve results, I think it's easier to change their minds on that just by changing some things around. dialing them back and letting them see the results, letting them see that fat loss, letting them see that muscle gain, that body recomposition. But like you said, when you say the people, though, that small population of people that just need to feel that pain to help them forget about the things that's going on in their lives, or maybe past traumas and things like that, that's a more difficult thing that I don't think I have an answer for.
Right, which is probably the right answer because I mean, it's like psychology at that stage is out of the wheelhouse of your coach, right?
100%. And it's funny that like there's this saying where some people go to psychologists, you know, to fix their problems, and they're like severely overweight, super unhealthy, and the psychologist will be like, what you need is a personal trainer, not a psychologist. But the other way around too, where they're like, some personal trainers have these people who are like, hitting it hard and they just want to achieve the results. But it's like I think you may want to talk to somebody, because I think there might be some blocks that I don't even have the capacity to help you with.
Yeah, I remember when I was traveling around the US and visiting lots of different gyms, I was struck by how many gyms had chiropractors inside them, but also how many didn't have therapists. And I thought, if I was a therapist, I'd open an office in a gym because you'd have loads of business.
Oh my god, that's so true. That is so true, and they do go hand in hand. Like I do believe that you're working on your physical health, whether you have issues or not. I think everyone has issues, right? It's kind of goes hand in hand a little bit, which I think is interesting, because you do, right? You talk about the psychology of athletics, but there's also the psychology of health and fitness. And health and fitness is being fit not just in the physical sense, but also in the emotional, mental sense.
Yeah.
And so it makes sense to kind of work on both simultaneously, right? And I think they're interconnected. They both lend to each other.
Yeah, that's why I like that example I was saying about the ghost in the shell. It should be the ghost and the shell. These need to
Mm.
be done at the same time,
Mhm.
not one or the other.
100%.
Yeah, but that's cool. That's interesting. So, what I want to talk about now is so we mentioned there, obviously, big name people like Goggins who are influencing the fitness landscape with their extreme version of what people need to do for success. And obviously, what we know about social media is that people do social media, generally speaking, to get views. So if I see that David Goggins has gotten loads of views because I made a video about this, then I will make a video about the same thing because right now that's hot. And in a philosophical sense, then we end up in a situation where we don't have any objective reality anymore. We have just a whole bunch of subjective reality, which is being shaped by an algorithm. But what I talk about quite often in the show is strategies that people can use philosophically to learn how to think. Like, how do you get rid of confirmation bias? How do you remove informal fallacies from your thinking? How do you become a higher order thinker? So, what would you say for you are the problems that we see in terms of social media negatively impacting the way people see fitness and health, and how to navigate the misinformation?
That's a great question. I think that social media has done many good things, to where it's connected us. It's made more information available to us and connected to us to a lot of experts in different fields. Now, as you said, the algorithm and the people, there is a lot of misinformation out there on social media, and it is incredibly difficult to filter through them, because the way that we are wired, we like controversy. We like to know that things that we thought were maybe good are actually bad, or things that we thought was maybe bad are actually good. It almost mixes things up. Now, on the other side of things, it's also, some people want to go online just to prove that what they know is true. So, I want to follow somebody who preaches about diet and exercise the way that I believe it to be true. But definitely the things that get clicks are the people that are just so absolute in their thinking to where it's just this one thing. And if you do anything else, you're doing it wrong.
Hmm.
Like kale is going to kill you, or red meat is going to give you cancer, um, or, lectins are going to give you cancer and kill you. And I think it's sexy to be so extreme these days on social media. So, what I would say is if there's anyone that is just so extreme in their thinking to just one specific way and it's almost cult like, be super wary of that. That is a red flag
Hmm.
because health and wellness is context dependent. So, depending on who you are, if you are somebody who's come from high level athletics, who's been fit your whole life, but has almost given up and sacrificed so much to stick to this lifestyle that you have of eating so super clean, being super disciplined, hitting all of your workouts and not saying no to social things because you have to get this workout in. What's healthy for you might be working out less, resting more, and going out and being social. Now, for somebody who is incredibly out of shape, goes out and drinks every night, hasn't been in the gym in a really long time, is feels exhausted all the time. Maybe his relationships are kind of not doing so well because he's just not feeling energized or focused, has no patience. That person should probably move more, should probably eat more whole foods, right? Whereas the other person, it's like just live a little bit, loosen up a little bit. So health looks different for different people. Of course, I'm just pointing out extremes right now, but it's all context dependent. What's healthy for a mom of three could be different to what's healthy for a single guy, in college, right? If him going to the gym 5 times a week helps get him away from going to parties and just smoking a lot of weed and not doing anything and playing video games, then go work out 5 times a week. For a busy mom, she barely has any time. So it could be 15, 20-minute blocks 3 to 4 times a week just to get herself moving, just to get some of those endorphins flowing so that she can kind of keep up with what she has to do, the demands of, all the responsibilities that she has. So, and some people just prefer the digestibility of, vegan products. Some people prefer the digestibility of, animal products. You can't really say one is perfect for everyone. So I do think being wary of people that are very black and white in their thinking.
Yeah, but you're right. You do see that on social media, don't you? And I think it's because people feel the pressure to maybe brand themselves as well. I mean, it's like Liver King. I mean, what's he going to do now apart from say eat liver? There's nothing else he can do. It's in the title, right? So yeah, it's you do see a lot of extremities of ideas on social media, and I find
And
that sorry.
sorry, and I will say one thing: if there is somebody who is willing to go back on what they used to believe, that's a green flag. Because I think a lot of us, right, you and I included, we used to have our philosophies around it could be anything, but let's take diet and exercise. How we were as coaches, you know, 10 years ago, 15 years, it's just not the way that we're coaches today, right? If we were to go and do it all over again. So I think people evolve and your thinking evolves. And diet and exercise is such a broad space to where exercise could be going to jujitsu or karate. Exercise could be going hiking, rock climbing, windsurfing. It's you can do any of that, and all of them are right, and they're all awesome. Being interacting with people, being out in nature, and I think through each stage of life, what is healthy to you will also change. And so I think if you're willing to go back on what you believed, and also of course people that do get their information from science based things, all those studies are a little yeah, they're sometimes they're a bit difficult to interpret, and some people interpret those differently even. But I would say definitely find people who are more genuine in their thinking.
Yeah, and I think it's important what you said too is, and that's something I wanted to talk about before we wrap this up, which is this idea that you know you said there, of course, you're a different coach than you were 10 years ago. I certainly know I am and the things I think about have changed. And you're right. I did a podcast episode recently about trust. And there are three elements to trust. The first one is perception of ability. Can this person help me to reach my goals? The second one is what you'd said, which is perception of integrity. So, do I trust this person that they're going to be able to say, hey, I was wrong about that. And here's what the new data says. And it's really, like you said, that's a green flag. For me, someone marching to the beat of the same drum for 20 years, potentially, that's a problem more than anything else. But that brings me to this idea that, okay, if what we were doing 10 years ago was this one thing, for you it might have been even more recently, fighting in UFC, and maybe now you're more focused on maybe taking your clients and less on fighting. For me, it was, coaching and teaching seminars, and now at university. So it's identity, right? And that identity itself can change, and that can be very, very difficult. And I think that can be hard for people because, for example, I went to karate here in Scotland, right? And I went there to my old coach, who's 61 now. And when he saw me, he wanted to spar. And the thing is, he's in his 60s, right? He hasn't been able to give up his identity that he had when he was in his 30s, right? And it was quite interesting to me to see that, like, the ego hadn't changed at all, and it was like, okay, this guy's back here, we need to spar, and I need to try and lay one on him. And it's just, so I think that how I'm relating to this to the conversation is that we oftentimes have clients that strongly believe in something as an outcome, and their identity becomes wrapped up in that. And then when they try to change that and move to something that might be a more sustainable practice, it clashes with their identity. And that can be really difficult for people too, because, I've got my coach there that's like, well, I've always been better at karate than Kevin. I need to now prove this. But he doesn't need to prove anything because he's 60 odd. So, what do you think about that idea? And do you have any, like, thinking around that? And at least with yourself, how have you managed to sort of move yourself away from your identity that was strongly held in one area into another?
So this is actually a topic that I'm actively um, learning and parsing through. And I think this is, like you said, this is throughout our whole lives, right? We're constantly taking on new identities, shedding old ones. And I think that, for at least for me, and this could relate as well to your coach when you're telling me that story, it's like we hang on to these identities that got us to a certain point in life, to where it got people to notice us, it got us recognition, it got us validation. And we feel that if we let go of this identity, all of that goes away. It's like we become irrelevant. And I think the greatest fear that a lot of people have is just being irrelevant, not needed, not wanted, or not feeling of value. And I think athletes are prime examples of this, to where we, a lot of us, and this, thankfully not me, I've, got to branch out into other things growing up, but a lot of athletes, all they've been doing is just this, whether it's karate, MMA, basketball, rugby, soccer, football, all they've been doing since they were in grade school was this sport. And so they get praised for doing the sport. They get people who they don't even know, tell them, you inspire me because you do this. Like, I love the way that you play, blah, blah, blah. And so to them, it's like, wow, like this is who I am. I'm this person that's like revered, and this is all I know. And I'm really good at it. Like, what else would I be as good at? Like, nothing, because I've not put my time and effort into, or focus into, anything else. And so when the thought of it coming to an end, it really is like a death. And they say that athletes, experience two deaths, one at the end of their career and one when they actually die. Because when you step away from high level athletics, it's like your whole routine just changes. It's almost like coming back from war, right? You're a civilian again, to where you're just going to a gym that's like open to the public. It's not like a private facility. You don't have nutritionists, you don't have a physiotherapist, you don't have a strength conditioning coach that's like taking care of all these things for you. It's almost like you're kind of babied in a way, in a way to like make sure you're like in tip top shape, and then you're kind of released, right? There's no real, not that I know of, any real support for athletes after their careers.
Hmm.
And I think that's a really big problem. And kind of to tie that back to your question about like regular people having to change their identities, it clearly, the identity that you have that you're trying to cling on to was beneficial to you, highly beneficial to you in some way, and it made you feel really good. So I think there's a fear that moving on is letting go of this identity and going to one that's not going to make you feel as good. So I think there's one that's like the anticipation of it because they don't quite know what that looks like, even this new identity. Um, and I think that just comes back to people's aversion to change. Like we all fear change because it's mostly fear of the unknown because we don't know. We can't tell the future. We don't have time machines. And so I think being willing to change with the stage of your life is really important. Like for me, if you asked me 2 years ago, even like, hey, what do you think you're gonna be doing after your career? I would have been almost offended by that question for you to be asking me that because I had this fear of that coming to me, of that time coming, and like me not knowing what to do, like being completely in the dark because I had no idea, zero clue. And so that fear was so strong to where that question, I just didn't even want to touch it. I didn't want to explore it. I didn't want to think about it. And so I think to relate that back to the regular person of like maybe going from, being having 5 days a week to go to the gym and now, well, there's a baby on the way and I might have like maybe three, maybe even less than that. It's like, yeah, you're leaving one thing for another, but you don't know how good that next thing can be until you do that. And also, don't think that you can't have some semblance of what you used to have. So for me, it's like I still go to the gym 3 times a week. I hit it really hard with all these high level fighters, and my main goal is to be a great training partner. Like I want to be there. I want to push them. I want to be pushed, and that brings me value. And it's really for my mental health. Like I don't really go in for, the physical aspect is great, but just my mental health. Like I go in there to just feel like great and just feel connected to my body. And it's taken me time to settle into this new identity and I'm still settling into it, but I can't deny that I'm so much happier now because the more I know, the more I adjust, the more I grow, the more I learn, the more I apply and adapt. Um, Even though there is a part of me that still thinks back to that old identity of being like, oh my God, I wish I could have done things differently. And I wish I could go back there again and just to feel that like relevance and all that, which is the wrong reasons, right? To even do that because if really the process is what I am passionate about. I'm living that right now. So I think it's understanding that the fear is more about this uncertainty of things and how things are going to look, but also know that whatever it is that we feel this like innate desire that we need to do, like we're always going to be able to incorporate it in to some extent. Maybe not as fully as we used to, but it just other things kind of take its place and these other things are going to be equally as valuable or if not more. So that would be my best answer to that. But I think that it's a very difficult answer to answer because it's different for all of us.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing so much today and for being so open and honest and giving really useful advice, I'm sure, for everybody. If anybody listening would like to check Ramona out and follow her, then the links to her social media will be in the description. And thank you very much for joining me, Ramona.
Thank you so much for having me, Kevin. So glad we did this.
Me too. Thank you.